Hey friends, tonight we're heading back even further than gas lamps and chimney sweeps. Welcome to the stone-cold, straw-scratchy, wonderfully miserable world of medieval city life. This isn't the Middle Ages of shining knights and majestic castles. This is the Middle Ages of fleas, filth, and chamber pots emptied into the street at noon. A time when soap was suspicious, dentistry was a hammer, and water was a gamble with cholera. So before we dive in, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if mildly depressing history helps you sleep. I'd also love to know where you're listening from tonight, and what time it is over there. Always fun to see the Global Insomnia Club in action. Now, dim your lights. Wrap yourself in a blanket, preferably one that hasn't been used by your entire extended family, and maybe put on a fan for that gentle medieval wind effect. Because tonight, we're taking a slow, uncomfortable walk through a medieval city, one muddy step at a time. And by the end, you might just thank your tap water. Let's begin. You shuffle toward the table, or rather, the wooden plank that leans against two mismatched barrels. It wobbles when someone breathes too hard. You sit on a stool with 3 legs, which was once a stool with 4. There's no tablecloth, no plates, just a shared chunk of something that once resembled bread. It's hard, not day-old hard. Not week-old hard. We're talking could, bludgeon, a rat hard. And that's exactly what someone did last week. You chip off a piece with your teeth carefully. You've already lost 1 molar to this exact loaf. It tastes like hay and regret. You chew slowly, not out of pleasure, but because your jaw refuses to move faster. It's still waking up, like the rest of your body, except the lice. They never sleep. Next to the bread is a jug. It's filled with something murky, brown, and slightly bubbly. This is your drink. It's called small beer. Weak, flat, and barely alcoholic. Not because you're being health conscious, but because the water might kill you. And this hasn't yet. You drink. It's warm, slightly sour, but at least it's not wiggling. You consider that a win. Someone across the table sniffs the bread and shrugs. No butter. No jam. Those are stories people tell their children to give them hope. There might have been cheese once, a long time ago, during a holiday, when a distant cousin got married and slaughtered a goat. But not today. Today is just bread, and beer, and silence. The fire isn't lit, so the cold gnaws at your hands while you eat. You try holding the crust to warm your fingers. It doesn't help. It's colder than the floor. You look around. Your brother is gnawing on a corner like it owes him money. Your sister is dipping her piece in the beer to soften it. Smart, desperate, both. The only meat in the room is the memory of meat, and even that smells a bit off. You'd talk, maybe, if anyone had the energy. But morning isn't for conversation. It's for chewing. Slowly, carefully, while pretending this isn't your life. A breeze slips in through a crack in the wall. You huddle closer to your stool. Your elbow brushes the person next to you. You apologize with your eyes. Words feel too luxurious. You finish your chunk, still hungry, still tired, still you. No one announces the end of breakfast. It just fades. One by one, people drift from the table like smoke from a dying candle, back to chores, or cold corners, or rat-related business. You stand, wipe your hands on your tunic. The crumbs fall like tiny disappointments to the floor. Outside, the wind howls like it knows what's coming. Another long day, another cold belly, another round of trying not to die before supper. Welcome to breakfast. You survived it, for now. After breakfast, if we're still calling it that, nature calls. Not politely, not with dignity, just urgently and without options. You grab your cloak, already damp from yesterday's fog, and head outside. Yes, outside, because in your home, there is no such thing as an indoor toilet. That would be madness, and expensive, and slightly suspicious. You step into the cold. It greets your face like a slap with an icy fish. The mud sucks at your boots with each step. You're not walking to luxury. You're walking to a wooden box, a lean-to, a latrine, a hole in the ground with dreams. The outhouse, if it deserves such a title, sits at the far end of the yard, near the compost pile, the pig pen, and unfortunately, the neighbor's back window. It leans to one side. like it's trying to escape itself. You push open the door. It creaks, like a warning. Inside, it smells like centuries of bad decisions. The pit below is deep. You try not to look. You definitely don't breathe through your nose. That's a rookie mistake. You learned that the hard way. The seat is a slab of wood with a hole cut into it. No lid, no cover, just cold wood and questionable stains. You sit, cautiously, as if you're negotiating with fate. In winter, the seat is frozen, not metaphorically, literally. Your skin sticks to it, like a punishment from nature for having bodily functions. You finish as quickly as physics allows, which, sadly, is never fast enough. There's no paper. Paper is expensive. You use whatever's available. Straw, leaves, wool scraps, yesterday's regrets. Some people use moss. It's soft, until it's not. You hope the wind doesn't blow the door open. Privacy is a myth, and your dignity went out with the chamber pot last Tuesday. If you're lucky, it's just you out here. If you're not, there's a line, and the person behind you is coughing, deeply, rhythmically. The kind of cough that belongs in a church bell tower, echoing across a field of gravestones. Some families don't even have an outhouse. They use a chamber pot inside, a ceramic bucket with a lid, and no mercy. In the morning, it gets dumped in the nearest ditch, stream, or if you're really unlucky, out the upstairs window. Garde l'eau, they yell, and you'd better. You finish your business. You stand, stretch, regret. The wind cuts through your tunic. You shiver, again. No one congratulates you. No one applauds. But you did it. You braved the cold, the stench, the utter lack of comfort, all just to keep your intestines inside your body. You return to the house, boots muddier, nose running, soul slightly dimmer. Someone asks if it's clear. You nod, like a veteran returning from war. Welcome to medieval sanitation. You'll never look at indoor plumbing the same way again. You step out into the street, and it hits you before the cold does. The smell. It doesn't sneak up. It doesn't gently arrive. It assaults. Bold, unfiltered, and impossible to ignore. It's not one smell. It's a symphony. A pungent, aggressive symphony of everything that should not be. There's manure, from horses, donkeys, oxen, any animal that walks and poops, which is all of them, and they do it everywhere. No one cleans it up. It just layers, day after day, until the streets become a slow-cooking stew of filth. There's rot. From yesterday's fish, today's vegetables, last week's dreams. Vendors throw spoiled food into alleys. Rats move in. Cats follow. Nothing gets fully eaten. Everything gets fully smelled. There's the butcher's stall. He rinses his table with the same water all day. Blood pools. Flies gather. And the leftover bits, bones, scraps, offal, get dumped in the gutter. Right next to your shoes. Add to that the people. People who haven't bathed since the last solstice. People who share 1 bar of soap per family. People who believe perfume is for royalty, and that washing away your body's natural oils might let in demons. The scent of unwashed wool, sweat, and desperation hangs in the air like a fog. It clings to clothing, skin, hair, thoughts. You try to breathe through your mouth, but then you taste it, and somehow, that's worse. There's also the tanner's workshop down the road. He soaks animal hides in a mixture of water, urine, and dung. That's not a metaphor. That's the literal recipe. And yes, the wind does blow that direction. And then there's the public latrines. Communal spaces of collective shame. Overflowing pits. Rarely emptied. Sometimes collapsing. Children dare each other to look down. No one ever wins. In summer, everything stews. In winter, everything freezes. But not before releasing one last awful gasp as it turns to ice. Cold does not kill the smell, it simply preserves it. You walk through the city with your cloak tight, nose buried, eyes watering. Someone sneezes. You pray it wasn't aimed. Someone dumps a chamber pot. You sidestep without looking up. Instinct has taught you well. You pass a baker's shop. For a moment, you smell bread. Real bread. Warm, yeasty, almost beautiful. But it's immediately swallowed by the scent of dead fish and chimney soot. Even indoors, you're not safe. The walls absorb the stench, so do your clothes, so does your hair. You could move houses and still smell like your old one for a week. There are no scented candles, no air fresheners, no polite distance from discomfort. In medieval towns, the air lives with you, inside you, around you, above you, beneath you. Eventually, you stop noticing, or you tell yourself you have. The nose adapts, or it gives up. But sometimes, just sometimes, when the wind shifts, you catch something new. And you realize, horrifyingly, that it's worse. You stink. That's not an insult. It's a fact, a shared truth, a reality so universal that no one even bothers to mention it anymore. Everyone stinks. You, your neighbor, the bread seller, the mayor, the bishop, the goats, especially the goats, you haven't bathed in. Well, what day is it? That's a trick question. Days blur together when you're not sure if the grime under your nails is from last week's firewood or last month's mudslide. Bathing, in theory, is good for you. In practice, it's suspicious. People think it opens your pores too much, lets the bad air in, might make you catch something, like a fever, or worse, ideas. If you're rich, you have options. A wooden tub, heated water, maybe even herbs. Someone pours the water for you. Someone else throws petals in. Probably. For show. But you are not rich. You are not even bath adjacent. If you're poor, bathing is creative. Maybe you stand in a stream, fully clothed, because modesty matters even in mud. Maybe you scrub with sand. Maybe you just stand in the rain and call it a win. More likely, you use the public bathhouse. If one exists, if it's open, if you're brave, it's not a peaceful spa. It's a crowded, echoing room, filled with steam, naked strangers, questionable liquids, and whispers. Lots of whispers. People say the bathhouse is a place to relax. But you've seen too many rats and too few towels to believe that. Also, it doubles as a brothel on weekends. Or weekdays. Or, honestly, whenever it wants. Soap is rare. Handmade. Harsh. If you're lucky, it contains lye and ash. If you're less lucky, it contains old bacon grease and optimism. You don't use much. You can't. It's shared between households, and sometimes with livestock. Hair washing? Optional. Usually avoided. Lice are common. Accepted. Even. They're like roommates. Annoying, but persistent. You scratch without thinking, so does everyone else. You remember the last time you tried to bathe properly. It was summer. The river was full. You stepped in, slipped on something unidentifiable, and got out dirtier than when you began. You towel off with whatever's dry, which is usually nothing. Clothes don't help. They don't get washed often. Laundry means hauling water, boiling it, and scrubbing with your hands until they resemble pickled turnips. So you just shake things out, hang them in smoke, hope for the best. And the smell? It's still there. Just different now. Damp linen over wet wool, with a hint of used firewood and failed mint experiment. Eventually, you stop noticing. Again. Others do, though. They keep a polite distance, which is, honestly, the only benefit of medieval body odor. Built-in personal space. You lie down at night in the same sweat-soaked clothes, wrapped in the same blanket, on the same straw, and when you wake, you'll smell like yesterday, and the day before that, and the week before that, because in medieval life, cleanliness isn't next to godliness, it's next to impossible. You're thirsty, a simple problem, with no simple solution, because in medieval life, drinking water isn't refreshing, it's Russian roulette with a wooden cup. The river looks clean, from a distance. Up close, it's a swirling mix of mud, dead leaves, dung runoff, and whatever the butcher poured out this morning. You can try scooping it, filtering it, boiling it, but chances are, you're still sipping on something that once had hooves. Wells? Sure, if you're lucky enough to have one nearby, but the neighbors dump their chamber pots just a few feet away. The rain helps, sometimes, Other times it just stirs everything up and makes it worse. There's a bucket by your door. It's supposed to be for clean water. It's also used to rinse feet, soak laundry, and sometimes trap rats. The water inside is cloudy. You pretend not to notice. So, instead, you do what everyone else does. You drink beer. Not strong beer. Not party beer. Not cheers to the king beer. It's called small beer, low alcohol, barely fizzy, slightly sour, but it's been boiled, which means it's less likely to kill you. Probably. Children drink it. Grandmothers drink it. You drink it with breakfast, with lunch, and with the sad remains of dinner. It's not because you enjoy it. It's because it's the closest thing to safety in a cup. Milk? A gamble. It spoils fast. Vendors water it down. Some even add chalk, or lye, or worse, formaldehyde, if they're ambitious and morally flexible. Juice doesn't exist. Tea hasn't arrived yet. Coffee is centuries away. And water. Well, water is still trying to decide whether it wants to hydrate you or haunt your intestines. Sometimes, a traveling monk offers you holy water. You take it gratefully. It's slightly less holy after his mule kicks the barrel over. You hear of villages that use herbs to purify their water. Boil it with rosemary. Strain it through cloth. It helps. A little. Or it just changes the flavor from stagnant pond to herbed pond. Rainwater is prized. You leave out buckets and hope the sky blesses you, but the roof leaks faster than it collects, and pigeons are not respectful guests. If you're desperate, you just drink what's there, and then you wait for the cramps, the sweats, the runs. Maybe you survive, maybe you don't. Maybe you live long enough to say, I shouldn't have drunk from that puddle. You envy the rich. They have ceramic filters, personal wells, hired tasters. You have mud, hope, and a suspicious cup. So you take another sip of small beer. It's lukewarm, a bit flat, but it hasn't betrayed you yet. You raise it to your lips and whisper the medieval version of a toast. Please don't let this kill me. You work, not because it fulfills you, not because it's your passion, but because if you stop, you starve, and possibly freeze. And maybe get evicted by a man with a sword and a hat taller than your self-worth. There are no applications, no job interviews, no resumes, just whatever your hands can do, and whoever's desperate enough to hire them. Maybe you're a field hand. You wake up with the sun, if the sun even bothers showing up, and you trudge through mud to pull weeds, swing a hoe, or chase off pigs that aren't yours. Your back aches before breakfast, your knees buckle before noon, and your boss thinks water breaks are for the weak. Or maybe you haul things, barrels, stones, hay bales, whatever needs moving from one place to another, usually uphill, through slush, and for a wage that wouldn't feed a determined squirrel. If you're skilled, you might be a thatcher, a blacksmith's apprentice, or a carpenter with 3 fingers and a nervous cough. You work long hours, you breathe in soot, and you measure time by how many tools you've dropped on your foot. Factory jobs don't exist yet, but that doesn't make your work less repetitive. It just makes it colder. Lunch is a crust of bread. Again, maybe a bit of onion, if the rats missed one. You eat standing up, or sitting on a rock, or not at all if the foreman's in a mood. He usually is. There's no sick leave, no vacation, no mental health day. If you're ill, you work through it. If you're injured, you bleed quietly. If you die, someone else steps in before your body's cold. Children work too. They hold the tools. They chase the animals. They carry things that should carry them. You don't call it child labor. You call it life. Women work double. Chores at home, jobs in town, kids on hips, baskets on backs. Laundry, cooking, mending, scrubbing, bartering, birthing. Sometimes all in one morning. Wages come in coins, sometimes, or bread, or promises, or a nod from someone who says, you can come back tomorrow. You hope that's not a threat. The Lord takes a cut. The church takes a cut. The rats take a cut. By the time you hold your pay, there's barely enough left to hold. You go home sore. You don't stretch. You don't relax. You collapse into a pile of straw that pokes your ribs and whispers, you get to do it again tomorrow. You don't work to get ahead. There's no ahead, just not worse, not evicted, not starving, not buried. You sleep, not because you want to, but because you must. Because at dawn, the work begins again. And if it doesn't, that probably means you're dead. You step outside. It's daytime in the medieval city, which means chaos with extra footsteps. The air is thick with smoke, dust, and shouts. Lots of shouts. Everyone has something to say, and no one says it quietly. Vendors yell about bread, fish, eels, and mystery meat. You don't ask questions. You don't want answers. Somewhere nearby, someone's goat escapes. Again, you sidestep it, barely. There are no sidewalks, just dirt and mud and whatever the horse in front of you just left behind. You try not to step in it. You fail. You pretend you didn't. Carts rumble past at alarming speeds for something pulled by hooves and hope. One hits a corner too sharply and loses a wheel. No one stops. A boy grabs the wheel and runs. Maybe it's his now. That's the law of momentum and poverty. People push past you. Close. Shoulder to shoulder. Breath to breath. You'd like personal space, but that concept hasn't been invented yet. Children dart through the crowd like caffeinated squirrels. Some are selling apples. Some are picking pockets. You check yours. Still empty. Just like before. Someone bumps into you. Hard. You turn. They're already gone. Was that a thief? Or just a man with bad spatial awareness? Either way, your loaf of bread is gone. You weren't even holding one. That's how fast they are. The noise never stops. Church bells ring. Dogs bark. Metal clangs. A woman argues with a fishmonger about whether the fish is dead or just lazy. The fish looks tired. You relate. There are smells too. Frying onions. Fresh horse dung. Damp fur. Someone cooking something unidentifiable over a street fire. It might be soup. It might be soap. Possibly both. A man with a lute sings off-key about a knight who fell in love with a goose. No one tips him, except a cabbage. It bounces off his shoulder. He nods in thanks. Guards patrol the main road. Slowly. They look official, but mostly bored. They ignore the beggar, the brawl, and the man yelling at a puddle, unless you look them in the eye. Then you're suspicious. Someone spills something near your feet. You step around it. Whatever it is, it's steaming. You decide it's better not to know. You try to cross the street, but there's a procession, maybe a wedding, or a funeral, or a tax collection. Hard to say. All three look equally grim. It starts to drizzle. No one flinches. Rain is part of the schedule. You pull your hood up. It soaks through instantly. It's more decorative than useful. Like most laws. You reach the other side, not because it was safe, but because you didn't stop walking. You survive the streets of the city not through skill, but through stubbornness. You keep your head down, your hands in your pockets, and your expectations low. Because in the medieval city, every trip outside is an adventure. And most adventures include mud, yelling, and a mild risk of trampling. Night falls, or at least that's what people say. The sky was grey all day, now it's just darker grey. The streets thin out, doors shut, candles flicker behind cracked shutters. You don't go out at night, not unless you have to, and even then, you regret it immediately. There are no street lamps, only a few torches nailed to walls, flickering like they're trying to give up. Most go out by themselves. The rest are blown out by the wind, or someone's breath. You're never sure. The city at night feels different. The same walls, same mud, same smells. But everything leans closer, like it's listening. You hear footsteps. Yours. Then someone else's. Maybe it's an echo. Maybe it isn't. You don't look back. The air is cold and wet, like a damp hand pressed against your face. Every shadow looks like a man. Every man looks like trouble. If someone shouts, you don't run toward them. You go the other way. Fast. If someone whispers, you pretend you didn't hear. If someone follows you, you pretend you're not there. Guards? They exist, theoretically. You see one occasionally, holding a stick, pretending it's a sword. He doesn't stop anyone. He doesn't stop much at all. You give him a nod. He doesn't nod back. Criminals come out at night. Thieves, drunkards, desperate people doing desperate things. Some hide, some don't bother. It's too dark to see faces, too loud to hear names. You pass a doorway, and something moves inside. You keep walking. You pass an alley and hear breathing. You walk faster. Someone coughs behind you. You hold your breath. There's no safety in numbers, just a bigger crowd for someone to rob. If it rains, the streets flood quietly. Mud and filth swirl around your feet. You step in something soft. You don't ask. Inside, people sleep lightly. Or not at all. The walls creak. The rats scratch. A baby cries 2 doors down. A woman yells. Then stops. Then nothing. Fires happen. A candle tips. A stove cracks. The neighborhood gathers with buckets. Too late and too cold. You watch someone lose everything. You go back inside, grateful your everything was smaller. You try to sleep. You tell yourself it's safe now, but every sound outside says otherwise. Because the city at night isn't peaceful. It's waiting. You wake up coughing. Again. It's not surprising. In fact, if you didn't cough, people might assume you're dead. Or worse, healthy enough to be given more chores. The medieval city doesn't just smell bad, it breathes badly. Every gust of air carries something unwanted: smoke, soot, mold, and occasionally disease, with a name no one can spell. You don't know what you've caught. No one ever really knows. There's no test, no diagnosis, just symptoms: coughing, fever, rash, chills, swelling, bleeding. Or sometimes, all of them. In order. On the same day. Your neighbor has a cold. Or maybe it's consumption. Or plague. Hard to tell. He's still standing, so you give him space, just in case. Water doesn't help. It might have caused it. Food doesn't help. It might be the reason you're vomiting. Air? Suspicious. You try not to inhale too deeply. You fail. The most popular illness? Tuberculosis. Or, as they call it, consumption. Because it slowly consumes you. Lungs first. Then appetite. Then will to live. Coughing blood is normal. Romantic even. Poets love it. Then there's cholera. Fast. Efficient. You feel fine in the morning. By noon, you're racing to the bucket. By evening, the bucket is winning. Smallpox leaves scars. Typhoid leaves silence. Dysentery leaves nothing behind. And of course, the plague. It visits less often these days. But when it does, you know, black spots, buboes, panic, church bells, ringing for the wrong reasons. Again. Doctors? A gamble. Sometimes they bleed you, sometimes they burn you, sometimes they hand you a pouch of herbs and tell you to sleep near garlic. One told your cousin to sniff a dead toad. It didn't help. The church says it might be sin, or bad thoughts, or simply God being mysterious. You nod. You cough. You move on. You try home remedies: honey in hot water, mint leaves behind the pig pen, prayers whispered into the fireplace. Some say drinking warm beer helps. You've tried that. It only helps you forget you're sick. For a moment. Most of the time, you just lie down. Wrap yourself in a blanket that smells like 10 winters ago. And wait. Wait to get better. Or not. People die young. It's not unusual. It's expected. The strong ones live to 40. The rest become memories wrapped in linen and buried with one shoe. You see a funeral nearly every week. Sometimes 2. Small processions. Quiet sobs. Occasionally someone sneezes and everyone takes a step back. Your own body is a question mark. Every ache could be a strain or a sign. Every sore could be bruised muscle or slow death. You don't panic. There's no point. You just keep moving, keep coughing, keep pretending you're fine. Because in this city, disease isn't a visitor. It's a roommate. So you're sick. Again. At this point, you've tried everything. Boiled herbs, prayers, garlic tied around your ankles, avoiding eye contact with pigeons. Nothing worked. So, reluctantly, you send for the doctor. He arrives late. He always does. He's wearing a robe that was once white, but now looks like it's been through several wars. And possibly a soup pot. Around his neck, a pouch of dried rosemary. For protection, or for show, no one knows. He carries a satchel. It rattles. Inside, knives, leeches, string, a wooden spoon, and something that smells like regret. He doesn't ask you how you feel. He doesn't touch you gently. He looks at your tongue, sniffs vaguely in your direction, then declares your humors are unbalanced. You nod. You have no idea what that means. There are 4 humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Apparently, yours are all having a party, the wrong kind. The solution? Bloodletting. He pulls out a metal blade the size of optimism and slices your arm. Just enough to make you woozy. Then he attaches a leech. To encourage balance. You ask what happens if you faint. He shrugs. Still not better? Time for a purge. He hands you a potion. It smells like mold and sadness. You drink it. You immediately regret it. Your stomach empties faster than your will to live. He nods. That's good, he says. You're expelling the corruption. You ask what's in the potion. He says, mostly herbs. Then adds, and possibly lead. You stop asking questions. Some doctors prefer mustard plasters, smearing your chest with a spicy paste and wrapping you in wool until you smell like angry soup. Others try smoke enemas. Yes, smoke. Yes, there. If your condition worsens, and it usually does, he recommends rest, boiled turnips, and repentance. Also, no laughing, no loud noises, and no cheese. You wonder if he's treating the illness or punishing you for existing. Surgery? That's an option. A last resort. It involves a large sore, no anesthesia, and someone strong to hold you down. Infection is guaranteed. Survival is optional. He leaves you with a bill. It's not in money. You have none. He takes a chicken, or a blanket, or your last jar of pickled onions. Then he blesses your home with holy water that smells suspiciously like old beer. And just like that, he's gone, off to visit another poor soul with unbalanced humors and too much faith. You lie back down, dizzy, bloody, slightly on fire. You're not sure if you're better, but at least now, you can say you've had medical attention. Technically, you close your eyes and try to sleep. Because in this city, if the sickness doesn't get you, the doctor just might. You've survived another day, barely. You're still coughing, still broke, still covered in some combination of smoke, soup, and sorrow, but you're upright. So naturally, it's time to think about sin. Because in the medieval city, it's not enough to be poor. You must also be pure. The church watches, always, maybe not with eyes, but with rules. So many rules about what to say, what to wear, what to eat, when to kneel, how to think, and most importantly, who to fear. You go to Mass. You don't understand most of it. It's in Latin. The priest chants. The people murmur. You nod along like you know what's going on. You don't. But you hope God grades on a curve. You confess your sins, even if you didn't do anything. Just to be safe. Pride. Laziness. Thinking too hard. Once you dreamed about cheese during a sermon. You brought that up. Just in case. If you miss Mass, people notice. If you skip confession, people whisper. If you ask the wrong questions about heaven, the Bible, or why the priest has shoes, and you don't, people report you. They call it heresy. You call it curiosity. The church calls it crime. And crime is everywhere. Steal a loaf of bread? Get your hand chopped. Speak against a noble? Lose your tongue. Fall behind on taxes? Your house is relocated. Accused of witchcraft? Good luck. Especially if you're a woman, older than 40, have a cat, or know how to use herbs. Basically, if you've smiled during a full moon, you're on thin ice. Trials are public and not particularly fair. You might be innocent, but the judge is your landlord's cousin, and the jury once caught you sneezing near a shrine. It doesn't look good. Sometimes you're fined, other times flogged, or locked in the stocks, wooden frames that hold your head and hands while people throw cabbage. If you're lucky, it's just cabbage. For bigger crimes, there's the scaffold. You've seen it. Everyone has. In the town square, hammered wood, stained dark. The crowd gathers like it's a festival. Children sit on shoulders. Someone sells sausages. It's almost cheerful, until it isn't. The gallows creak. The executioner yawns. The crowd cheers. Then they go home, slightly hungrier, slightly more obedient. There are written laws. Somewhere. On parchment. In ink. In Latin. But most of what you follow is rumor. What you've heard. What you've seen. Happened to someone else. You learn by example, usually bad ones. You keep your head down. You don't ask why. You don't speak out of turn. You say your prayers. You avoid sarcasm. You make eye contact with the priest, but not too much. That's suspicious. Because here, salvation isn't just about the afterlife. It's about surviving the next inspection. You've survived another day, or at least most of one. You're still cold, still hungry, still slightly damp in places that should never be damp, but you're here. And somehow, so is everyone else. And that's where it gets strange. Because in this broken, crooked, coughing city, people still care. Not always, not loudly, but enough. Your neighbor shares a crust of bread when your cupboard is empty. It's stale, but it's something. You nod thanks. They nod back. Nothing more needs saying. A woman down the lane gives your sister her old shawl. It's moth-eaten, smells like garlic, and is technically more whole than cloth, but it's warmer than nothing, and warmer still for being given. A boy helps your grandfather across the market street, dodging carts and shouting butchers. He doesn't ask for coin, just a smile, or a boiled turnip. Either is fine. At the public fountain, when the water's not frozen, someone lets you cut the line, because your bucket is smaller, because your hands are shaking, because they remember when they were you. In the tavern, laughter still happens. Rough, wheezy, half-toothed laughter, but real. The ale is warm, the floor is sticky, the songs are out of tune, but it feels like something close to peace. For a little while. Sometimes the butcher gives bones for free. For the dog, he says, even if you don't have one. The baker leaves the day-old loaves out back. The rats get some. You get there earlier. Someone helps patch your roof. Someone else watches your kid for 10 minutes. Someone hands you a flower for no reason. It's wilted. It's perfect. These moments don't fix anything, but they hold things together. Because in a world where the air might kill you, the water might poison you, and the church might fine you for sneezing on a holy day, a small kindness is revolutionary. It's not grand, no heroic speeches, no life-changing miracles, just one human being deciding not to make life harder for another. That's all. And yet, somehow, it's enough. Enough to keep walking. Enough to face the mud, and the cold, and the coughs, and the endless noise. Enough to believe, foolishly, stubbornly, that tomorrow might not be worse. You lie down again. Same blanket, same straw, same creaking roof. But this time, you think of the old man who handed you a candle on your way home. You didn't ask. He just saw the dark. And in this place, seeing someone else's dark is the closest thing to light you'll ever get. So now you've seen it. The medieval city. Not the one from storybooks, not the one with shiny knights and castle towers, but the real one. The one with rotten bread, cold floors, screaming vendors, and a very suspicious bucket. You didn't have privacy, or safety, or plumbing. You worked every day to stay poor. You prayed not to die, or worse, to live just long enough to watch others die first. And yet, somehow, people endured. Not because they were stronger, not because they liked it, but because there was no other option. They sang, they laughed, they helped each other across icy streets and handed each other stale loaves and warm shoulders when nothing else made sense. You probably wouldn't last a day, but they did, every day. So tonight, as you lie in your clean bed, under your soft blanket, beside your running water and your mostly quiet neighbors, breathe deep. Because you're not in the Middle Ages. And that is your greatest historical achievement. Imagine walking into a building filled with steam, echoes, and bare skin. It's early morning in ancient Rome. You've just been told it's time to bathe. Not in a private tub, not in a quiet room, but in a massive public complex, shoulder to shoulder with strangers, women of all ages, all classes, all moods. There's no such thing as privacy. You're not alone, ever. The space is warm and wet, and smells faintly of olive oil, damp stone, and too many people sweating in too small a space. Water trickles constantly, murmurs float across the tiled halls. It's beautiful, in a way, but also overwhelming. You think you're just here to rinse off, but no. This isn't just a bath. It's an event, a social theatre, a ritual, and a daily obligation. Women gossip, whisper, observe. They comment on hair, skin, clothing, and who came with whom. It's not just about hygiene, it's about status. And the space itself? Enormous. Domed ceilings, echoing marble, walls still holding last night's heat. You pass through caldariums filled with heavy steam, tepidariums that lull you into sleepiness, and frigidariums so cold they shock your breath back. The journey is hot, then mild, then icy. Every bath is a test of temperature, endurance, and etiquette. But the worst part? You're probably bare, or nearly so. Some women wrap thin cloth around themselves, some don't bother. Your feet slap against damp floors, and your skin touches stone benches warmed by dozens of bodies before yours. Eyes wander. So do rumors. You're not just bathing. You're being watched for your posture, your perfume, your scars, your silence. And if you're thinking, well, at least it's clean. Number, not really. There's no soap, just oil rubbed into the skin and then scraped off with a curved tool called a strigil. That's right. You don't wash, you scrape, with shared tools, sometimes reused towels. The water? Recycled, shared, sometimes warmed with old charcoal and mystery substances. There's a kind of peace here, but it's the peace of submission, not comfort. Now, imagine being in this space every day, with no headphones, no towels of your own, and nowhere to hide. Still think you'd last? You came here to bathe. But that was your first mistake, because bathing, in ancient Rome, was only part of the experience. In truth, you've just stepped into a social network made of steam and whispers, where status, gossip, and subtle warfare unfold quietly over hot stone and lukewarm water. Women didn't just undress, they performed. You'll see gold earrings glinting through the mist. You'll hear voices rising in polite laughter, or sharp, hushed tones you're not meant to catch. Someone's showing off a new jar of imported perfume. Another is letting her slave oil her legs extra slowly, just so others can watch. Welcome to the ancient version of scrolling. In these rooms, conversation flows like water, marriages are discussed, enemies are dissected, a senator's affair, mentioned, a neighbor's weight gain, whispered. It's a place where reputation is bathed and dried daily, alongside the body. And if you think you can simply stand in a corner, rinse off quietly, and avoid attention, you're wrong. Every glance is a judgment. Why are your sandals cracked? Is that tunic last year's style? Did your slave forget to brush your hair before you arrived? Everything is noticed. Everyone is noticed. Especially if you try not to be. The elite women come here to display control, not just of their appearance, but of their place in the world. The poorer women come because they have to. You? You're somewhere in between, unsure where to look, what to say, or how to hold yourself without looking either arrogant or weak. You'll want to avoid eye contact, but you won't be able to, because someone's already watching you. In this network, silence can be suspicious. Speaking too freely can be dangerous. Saying nothing is also saying something. It's a balancing act with no rules, only consequences. And when you leave, damp and dizzy, you're not done. What you said in the tepidarium may follow you home. What you didn't say might follow you longer. By the time you lie down that night, you'll realize you weren't just bathing. You were being measured. And tomorrow, you'll have to do it all again. You thought you'd walk in, rinse off, and be done. But in ancient Rome, bathing was not a moment. It was a process, and a long one, a carefully sequenced ritual with temperatures that tested the body, and unspoken rules that tested the mind. First, there's the apoditerium, the changing room. You hand your clothes to a slave, or tuck them in a cubby. Hopefully, you've brought no valuables. Theft was common. Even in a bathhouse, human nature didn't soak away. Then, the journey begins. You enter the caldarium, the hot room, and it's not just hot. It's thick. Your breath feels slower. Your skin begins to sting. There's a pool here, shallow and steamy, but you don't soak. You sweat. That's the point. To open your pores, to surrender to the heat. There are no clocks, only feeling. You stay until you can't. Until your head pulses or your legs grow weak. Then, and only then, you move to the tepidarium. The tepidarium is warm, dim, quiet. Some people linger here for hours, letting their bodies return to balance. You might sit on a stone bench, eyes half closed, listening to the scrape of a strigil or the faint trickle of water. It's a lull, the closest thing to calm in the entire building. But you're not done. Next comes the frigidarium, a cold plunge meant to shock you awake. The water is colder than you expect, always. Some shriek when they enter, others hold their breath, but nobody skips it. Cold, in Roman logic, sealed the ritual. It was cleansing, balancing. A reminder that comfort is never the goal. You leave the water changed, not refreshed, but different, softened, maybe, or stripped. Because this wasn't just a wash. It was a purification, of dirt, of odor, of sluggishness, and perhaps of something deeper, like sin, or fear, or yesterday's failures. But even now, dripping and light-headed, you're not free to go. There's oil to apply, hair to pin, garments to smooth. Your return to the world must be composed, controlled, seen. This is not a spa day. This is a ritual of control, of social expectation, masked as hygiene. It demands patience, tolerance, and quiet endurance. And if you're wondering how Roman women did this every day, they didn't have a choice. You might imagine a tidy shelf of soaps, scrubs, and scented lotions. But no. In ancient Rome, beauty came from a toolkit, often metallic, often sharp, and rarely gentle. Roman women didn't bring fluffy towels or pastel-colored bottles. They brought instruments. The most essential? The strigil, a curved metal scraper. No soap was used in these baths. Instead, bodies were rubbed with olive oil, then scraped clean. Skin, sweat, dust, and oil. All removed in long, practiced strokes. It sounds smooth in theory. In reality, it was abrasive. And they didn't do it alone. For the wealthy, slaves performed the work. They rubbed the oil, scraped the skin, and collected what came off, quietly, efficiently, without complaint. You, if you're less fortunate, might scrape yourself, awkwardly, while being watched by others. There were also razors, simple and often brutal. Not quite like the blades we know today. Some were bronze, others iron. Dull by modern standards, but sharp enough to cut both hair and patience. Legs, underarms, sometimes arms, hairlessness was admired, but pain, quietly endured. Next to these came tweezers for plucking stray hairs, and nail cleaners for fingers and toes that were judged in silence. Then came the cosmetics. But again, don't picture softness. There was no foundation, only powders, often chalky white, sometimes made from lead. Pale skin meant wealth. Sunday-darkened skin meant labor. So women covered themselves in pale dust, layer by layer, even if it cracked under the heat. Eyes were outlined in charcoal or ash. Lips tinted with red, made from crushed minerals, or sometimes, disturbingly, insects. Scent? That came from tiny perfume bottles, made of glass or ceramic, holding oils scented with herbs, flowers, even resins from the east. And none of this was casual. Every item you carried said something. What you used, how much, who applied it. Whether your scent lingered too long or faded too fast, it all mattered. Even your comb spoke of class. Some were bone, others ivory. All were shown, even if just for a moment. It wasn't about natural beauty. It was about maintenance, message, and sometimes survival. To bathe in Rome was to arm yourself with tools, scents, oils, and the silent hope that what you carried might hide what you lacked. Because in the steam-filled mirrors of ancient baths, no flaw stayed hidden for long. You might think, surely there was something to wear. And yes, technically there was. Roman women often entered the bathhouse with a linen wrap, a cloth called a subligaculum, or perhaps a light tunic. But these garments were thin, loose, and when wet, not much better than nothing at all. Some wore nothing from the start. Bathing attire wasn't about modesty. It was about class, comfort, and sometimes convenience. The wealthy might arrive in a carefully knotted wrap, dyed just faintly with color. The poor, often bare, or close enough. Fabrics were expensive. Privacy was a luxury. In the caldarium, the air was heavy and wet. Any cloth clung. Any sense of distance between skin and eyes disappeared quickly. A soaked wrap became transparent. A step across the floor could shift it out of place. And here's the uncomfortable truth. People were watching. Not necessarily with lust. Not always with cruelty, but with attention. In Roman culture, the human form, especially among the elite, was not hidden. The idea of nudity wasn't shameful, but it wasn't free of judgment either. Were you toned? Too thin? Too soft? Was your skin pale, as it should be, or darkened by the sun? A sign of labor? Were your shoulders bruised from dress straps? Did your scars show? Clothing didn't protect you from scrutiny. Sometimes it invited it. And what you wore or didn't said something. Married women might wrap tighter. Young girls, looser. Older women, perhaps, cared less. Or more. It depended on the day, the mood, the company. There were no private cubicles, no towels handed at the door. If you wanted to cover yourself, you brought your own means. If it slipped, you adjusted quietly, or didn't. And men? They bathed at separate hours, usually later in the day. But rules weren't always followed. Some wandered in early. Some looked through cracks. Some just didn't care. The boundary between men's time and women's time was drawn more in expectation than in stone. So no, there were no bathing suits, no straps, no elastic, no modesty panels. Just cloth, steam, stone, skin, and the understanding that your body, like everything else in Rome, was never entirely yours to keep hidden. If you think being rich in ancient Rome meant peace and pampering, think again. Yes, aristocratic women didn't bathe alone. But they didn't bathe in privacy either. Instead, they were attended by female slaves, quiet, skilled, and always watching. The noblewoman reclined. That much is true, but she didn't rest. She performed, even in stillness. A lady of status was expected to remain composed while being scraped, oiled, and combed, without flinching, without speaking out of turn. The slaves? They did everything. They rubbed warm oil into her skin. They scraped it off with practiced ease, collecting the residue. They held her robe when it slipped. They combed her hair into elaborate waves, sometimes wet, sometimes burning with the heat of the caldarium. They adjusted her ornaments, polished her feet, and made sure no part of her was left unattended. And all of it, in silence. A misplaced word, a brush too hard, a pause too long, could mean punishment. Some were slapped, others dismissed. Few ever spoke, unless asked. These women weren't friends, they weren't company, they were tools of presentation. Yet they saw everything. The blemishes, the aging skin, the bruises, the wrinkles no one else was allowed to mention. In their hands lay not just combs and oils, but secrets. They knew who was pale from illness, who was pregnant before it showed, who cried quietly while being prepared. And they could never say a word. For the noblewoman, this wasn't leisure. It was exposure. Her power depended on appearance, and that appearance rested on the hands of others. She didn't control the tools. She controlled the people who held them, or tried to, because even in silence, resentment could live. A tug too tight, oil too hot, or a glance that lingered, all small rebellions from women who had no rights, but daily access to the most fragile parts of their mistress's pride. In a bath full of heat, sweat, and judgment, the noble woman sat like a queen on a throne of vapor. But the hands that touched her weren't gentle for love, they were skilled for survival. So no, bathing wasn't restful. It was a ritual of display and dominance, built on the backs of those who had no choice but to serve. And even there, in the warmth and luxury, she could never fully relax. Roman bathhouses had a schedule, or so the signs claimed. Women bathed in the morning, men in the afternoon, It was a simple system, in theory. But in practice, rules slipped like steam through cracks in stone. You might think a morning bath meant safety, a space free from wandering eyes, whispers, or unwelcome presence. But the walls had gaps, and so did the rules. Some men, workers, servants, opportunists, claimed they were just fixing something, a broken pipe, a leaking wall, a loose tile. They passed quietly, tools in hand, eyes not where they should be. Others didn't pretend. They came early, too early. By accident, of course. A wrong turn, a misunderstanding, a blurred schedule. And by the time they were noticed, the damage had already been done. Not always with hands, sometimes only with eyes, but that was enough. The architecture of Roman baths didn't help. Thick walls and narrow corners, echoes that hid footsteps, curtains instead of doors, and always the possibility of being seen. Some women noticed and turned away, others ignored it, a few didn't. There are records, vague, half-told, of women shouting, throwing stones, calling attendants, stories of men running, stories of men not running, of consequences delayed, or never delivered. And still, the women came, because where else could they go? Bathing wasn't just about cleanliness, it was expectation, ritual, routine, and the risk became part of the process, like too hot water, like scraped skin, like silence. Even among themselves, women spoke carefully. About who saw what, who came too early, who lingered too long behind the steam. The names weren't always known, but the pattern was familiar. In poetry, some called it admiration. In reality, it was intrusion. Not every man came to Lear, but some did, and they didn't need much. A crack in the wall, a moment alone, a woman too distracted to notice she was no longer alone. So women bathed early, together, quickly, and even then, they watched the walls. Because privacy wasn't guaranteed, safety wasn't promised, and comfort, even in a bath built for beauty, was something you had to defend quietly. In Roman bathhouses, silence was rare. But stillness? Even rarer. The walls were thick, yes, made of stone and plaster, but they weren't deaf, and more importantly, they weren't solid. Time, heat, and humidity chipped away at corners. Maintenance was frequent, and every crack was an opportunity. It's whispered that some men, not many, but enough, would cut small holes into the walls. Not for ventilation, not for repairs, but for watching. Some came disguised as workers, carrying tools they didn't know how to use. Others offered to clean, to pour water, to tend the fires under the hypocausts, the heated floors beneath the baths. Their real job? To linger, to listen, to look. They crouched in corners, peered through service tunnels, waited near shared walls between the men's and women's sections. These men didn't need much. A flicker of movement, the outline of a silhouette, a breathless laugh in steam. And just like that, they'd turn private rituals into private fantasies. It wasn't always violent, not always vulgar, but it was always unwelcome. The women knew. They moved differently near walls, spoke more softly in certain corners. Some even tested the plaster before undressing. They wrapped towels tightly, not always for modesty, but for control. Yet it kept happening. And strangely, some poets praised it. They wrote verses about accidental glimpses and divine beauty glimpsed through marble. They called it passion. They called it fate. They described women half, seen as nymphs, as muses, as goddesses, but they were never asked. Real women didn't write those poems. Real women were being watched during the one moment of the day meant to be theirs. And still, the baths remained, because what else could they do? Public bathing was not optional. It was Roman, expected, required. And the bathhouse, for all its risk, was also a place of community. So they adjusted, whispered in different spots, bathed in pairs, avoided corners, avoided stillness. And when they felt watched, which they often did, they didn't always speak, but they remembered. Because in the Roman bathhouse, the walls didn't just echo. They watched you back. In Roman bathhouses, silence was rare. But stillness? Even rarer. The walls were thick, yes, made of stone and plaster, but they weren't deaf, and more importantly, they weren't solid. Time, heat, and humidity chipped away at corners. Maintenance was frequent, and every crack was an opportunity. It's whispered that some men, not many, but enough, would cut small holes into the walls, not for ventilation, not for repairs, but for watching. Some came disguised as workers, carrying tools they didn't know how to use. Others offered to clean, to pour water, to tend the fires under the hypocausts, the heated floors beneath the baths. Their real job? To linger, to listen, to look. They crouched in corners, peered through service tunnels, waited near shared walls between the men's and women's sections. These men didn't need much. A flicker of movement, the outline of a silhouette, a breathless laugh in steam. And just like that, they'd turn private rituals into private fantasies. It wasn't always violent, not always vulgar, but it was always unwelcome. The women knew. They moved differently near walls, spoke more softly in certain corners. Some even tested the plaster before undressing. They wrapped towels tightly, not always for modesty, but for control. Yet it kept happening. And strangely, some poets praised it. They wrote verses about accidental glimpses and divine beauty glimpsed through marble. They called it passion. They called it fate. They described women half, seen as nymphs, as muses, as goddesses, but they were never asked. Real women didn't write those poems. Real women were being watched during the one moment of the day meant to be theirs. And still, the baths remained, because what else could they do? Public bathing was not optional. It was Roman, expected, required. And the bathhouse, for all its risk, was also a place of community. So they adjusted, whispered in different spots, bathed in pairs, avoided corners, avoided stillness. And when they felt watched, which they often did, they didn't always speak, but they remembered. Because in the Roman bathhouse, the walls didn't just echo. They watched you back. Not every Roman woman stayed quiet. Yes, most did, out of habit, out of fear, out of the weary understanding that complaint rarely brought justice. But not all. Some turned, some shouted, some threw whatever they had in hand, a sandal, a comb, a sharp word loud enough to turn heads across the steam. There are fragmentary records, scattered lines in letters, marginal notes in faded scrolls, that tell of women fighting back. A noblewoman reported a workman who returned too often to the same hallway. A merchant's wife warned others to avoid a certain corner. A slave girl screamed so loudly when she saw a face in the wall that the entire bathhouse paused. Sometimes the intruder ran, sometimes he didn't, sometimes he laughed, sometimes he vanished, never returning, or just choosing a new wall. And sometimes, retaliation wasn't loud. Some women took matters into their own hands, or hired others to do it for them. A whispered payment. A quiet conversation. A threat that didn't need to be repeated. The women of Rome knew how to move within a system not built to protect them. They found the cracks, just as their watchers had. And though we don't have their poems, we have their echoes. Hints in satire. Sarcasm in comedy. Traces of stories, half erased by time, but not quite gone. These weren't helpless figures wandering in mist. They were calculating, angry, clever, and when pushed, some pushed back. Because the bathhouse wasn't sacred, it wasn't private, but it was theirs, at least in name. And there's a certain rage that comes from being observed where you are meant to be safe. Not every woman picked up a stone, but every woman carried a memory. So yes, many stayed silent, but not because they didn't notice, because they were waiting. And when the right moment came, sometimes they reminded the walls that watching could have consequences. You might imagine the Roman baths as sparkling, marble gleaming, steam rising like purity itself. But let's be honest, you wouldn't want to dip a toe in, because cleanliness, as we understand it, wasn't really the goal. There was no soap, no antiseptic, no chlorine, just warm water, olive oil, and a lot of people. Picture this, dozens, sometimes hundreds, of bodies, sweating, scraping, soaking, in the same pools, the same floors, the same benches. all day. Oil didn't dissolve dirt, it only moved it. You rubbed it into your skin, scraped it off with a strigil, and left behind a mixture of sweat, oil, skin flakes, and maybe more. Where did it go? Some of it went into collection jars, some into the water, some onto the floor, where it mixed with dust, hair, and ash from the heating fires below. The water itself wasn't always replaced. In some bathhouses, it was refreshed regularly. In others, not so much. The frigidarium, especially, often doubled as a catch-all basin, cold, communal, and questionably filtered. Slaves cleaned, yes. They swept and rinsed and wiped things down. But with what? No disinfectants, no mops. Just rags and water, from the same source everyone bathed in. Infections weren't rare. Skin conditions, eye irritations, even parasites. The bathhouse might leave you relaxed, but it could also leave you itchy, red, or worse. And let's not forget the shared tools. Strigils passed from hand to hand, combs too. Towels, if provided, were thin, reused, and rarely washed between users. If someone had a rash, or worse, it might become yours by the end of the day. But still, people came. Because the Roman bath wasn't about sterilization. It was about ritual, routine, social belonging. And in a world where most people lived in filth, the baths felt like luxury, even if they weren't clean by modern standards. So next time you imagine ancient Romans soaking in elegance, remember this. They were soaking in each other. Let's say you've made it this far. You've entered the bath, endured the heat, scraped your skin, smiled politely. Now it's time for the finishing touches, shaving, trimming, maybe a little grooming. But in ancient Rome, grooming wasn't separate from bathing. It happened right there, often beside someone else doing the exact same thing. Shared space, shared tools, shared exposure. Shaving was done with small metal razors, not disposable, not sterile. They were used again and again, often rinsed quickly between clients. Sometimes not. There was no shaving cream, no hot towels, just oil, maybe a little water. Cuts happened, nicks, tiny bleeds, always assumed, rarely cleaned. Now picture this, a man shaving beside you accidentally slices his chin. The same razor is wiped on a cloth and handed off. Someone uses it on an ankle, then it's used again on an arm, then on your leg. No gloves, no antiseptic, no pause. It wasn't just shaving, it was group grooming, nail cleaning, ear scraping, even lancing small boils, all done in corners of the bathhouse. And all done in the same humid air, using the same tools, near the same pools of water. The risks? Quiet, invisible, persistent. There's evidence of skin infections, fungal outbreaks, and parasitic infestations linked to bathhouse culture. Rashes spread. Eye diseases moved quickly. Lice didn't care what class you belonged to. Even the strigil, that trusty scraper, could carry more than oil. Small abrasions on the skin allowed bacteria to enter. No one saw it until it festered. And for women? The risks were different, but no less real. Shared benches, shared tools, damp cloth wraps. Warm water and delicate areas don't mix well without hygiene. And hygiene, in Rome, was a matter of belief, not science. But still, people shaved, they groomed, they scraped and preened and plucked, because beauty wasn't optional. Cleanliness wasn't about safety, it was about social standing. So when you imagine the Roman bathhouse, don't just picture marble and mist. Picture a man shaving his face while someone nearby cleans their feet in the same bowl of water. Because in ancient Rome, personal grooming was anything but personal. In most places in ancient Rome, class was everything. You could tell a senator from a servant just by the cut of their tunic, the sandals they wore, the way they held silence. But in the bathhouse, everyone got wet. The baths were among the rare places in Roman society where status lines blurred, at least physically. Senators, merchants, slaves, foreigners, and freedwomen all bathed in the same spaces, under the same roof, often at the same time. There were no VIP rooms, no velvet ropes, just steam, water, and proximity. You might see a noblewoman reclining on a stone bench while a freedwoman scrubbed her back. a fruit seller dipping her feet in the same basin as the wife of a magistrate, a slave quietly scraping oil from her arms beside the daughter of a landowner. The only true barrier was attitude. The elite still acted like elites. They arrived with attendants. They bathed with carefully practiced posture. They spoke with the rhythm of someone used to being heard, even in silence. But they still shared the water. And that created tension. Some resented the closeness. Others saw it as an opportunity to observe, to eavesdrop, to gossip. A merchant might overhear a senator's wife speaking carelessly. A slave might recognize a bruise on her mistress's back. A noblewoman might notice someone wearing perfume that should have been out of reach. Bathing became a kind of unspoken theater, where everyone played a role but no one had a script. And it wasn't always peaceful. There are records of arguments, jealous glances, even the occasional public slap. Someone sat too long on the warmest bench. Someone looked too long at the wrong person. Someone whispered, and someone else heard. Yet no one left, because no one could afford to. The bathhouse was essential. To miss it meant being noticed, for the wrong reasons. So people endured. They shared the space. They softened their tone. Or they hardened their gaze. Because in Rome, you could rise and fall in reputation as quickly as a ripple across the water. And in the bathhouse, no matter your rank, everyone soaked in the same warmth and the same judgment. On the surface, the Roman bathhouse was calm. Steam floated. Water trickled. Voices softened to a gentle hum. But beneath that surface, just like beneath the water, things stirred. Because bathing in Rome wasn't only about hygiene. It was about competition. Not the loud kind. Not the kind with rules. But the quiet kind. The kind fought with glances and gestures, with skin tone, perfume, and the sharpness of a hairstyle. Women noticed. Who entered with a newer wrap. Whose skin had no blemishes. Who had the brightest oil sheen on her shoulders. It wasn't vanity. It was survival. Reputation in Roman society didn't just depend on who you married or what you owned. It depended on how you appeared in shared spaces. And the bathhouse was the most shared space of all. A woman might sit longer in the tepidarium just to be seen. Another might position herself near the best light. Someone might whisper a compliment, just loud enough for the right ears to hear. Even silence was a weapon. You could ignore someone, look past them, or glance once, and never again. All of it meant something. All of it could spread beyond the baths, into homes, streets, and rumor. Then there were the tools, the combs, the oils, the perfumes. Each one told a story. Imported jasmine? Expensive. Local lavender? Common. No scent at all? Suspicious. Some brought slaves to attend them. Some came alone, either by necessity or pride. Some watched others be scrubbed, scraped, polished, and took note. Whispers formed in steam, and reputations too. You didn't have to say a word to win this battle. But if you said the wrong word, or sat in the wrong spot, or wore the wrong shade of rouge, you could lose. It wasn't a war of swords. It was a war of softness, a war of presence. And the only rule was, be noticed, but not too much. Be perfect, but never obvious. Be admired, never questioned. Because when you stepped out of the baths, still damp, still glowing, you weren't just clean. You were either elevated or quietly, irrevocably judged. Conclusion. So now, you've bathed like a Roman. You've stepped into steam that never quite cleared. You've walked barefoot across warm stone, watched, watching, always aware. You've scraped oil from your skin, shared razors, shared silence, shared too much. And maybe, just maybe, you've started to wonder how they did this. Every single day. It wasn't restful. It wasn't private. It wasn't clean. It was survival, performed quietly, beautifully, and sometimes painfully, beneath marble ceilings and behind half-closed eyes. The Roman bathhouse wasn't a spa. It was a mirror, not of the body, but of the world, where power, class, gender, and reputation all soaked together, and where even warmth could feel cold. And still, they returned, morning after morning, because not showing up meant something, too. So next time you imagine ancient luxury, think again. It smelled of oil and old water. It sounded like gossip and scraping metal. It felt like pressure on wet skin. And you? You probably wouldn't have lasted a day. But now, you don't have to. You're dry, you're distant, and you're safe, under blankets instead of linen wraps, with no one watching you through cracks in the wall. You've survived the baths. Sleep well, traveler. You've earned it. In today's world, committing a crime might mean facing a trial, paying a fine, or serving time behind closed prison doors. But in the medieval world, things were much simpler and much crueler. There were no long prison sentences, no quiet re-entries into society, and certainly no such thing as a clean slate. If you committed a crime, everyone would know. Because in the past, punishment wasn't just about pain or isolation, it was about exposure. The justice system didn't aim to rehabilitate. It aimed to shame. Back then, punishment was public, physical, and permanent. You didn't sit in a cell where no one could see you. Instead, your sentence walked with you. It was burned into your skin, shaved into your scalp, or tattooed across your face. The entire point was to turn your body into a billboard of guilt, a warning, a lesson for others. Medieval societies believed that punishment should not only fit the crime, but mark the criminal. Sometimes literally, branding was common. Thieves might have a T seared onto their hands or foreheads. Slaves trying to escape could be marked, so they could never blend in again. And for women accused of adultery or betrayal, heads were shaved clean in front of a watching crowd, stripped of dignity, beauty, and identity in one single act. There was no privacy in punishment, no discretion. Imagine stealing a loaf of bread and spending the rest of your life with the word thief carved onto your cheek. You couldn't hide. You couldn't start over. You were the crime. Why such harshness? Because public shame was cheaper and more effective than a prison system. Prisons were rare, expensive, and often used only to hold someone before a public execution or beating. The real punishment came after, on your body, in your face, in the way people recoiled from you at the market or crossed the street when you passed by. Guilt wasn't just carried in your conscience, it was written into your skin. Even small crimes were met with these humiliations. Petty theft, disobedience, insulting a noble. If you weren't powerful or rich, justice didn't come softly. It came with blades, fire, ink, or iron. And the worst part? These marks were permanent. There were no laser removals, no plastic surgery, no fresh starts. The past didn't stay in the past. It followed you home, followed you for life. In some ways, it was psychological warfare. The punishment didn't need to keep hurting to be effective. It just needed to keep reminding you, reminding everyone else. It was a society that believed deeply in honor and reputation, and once those were taken, you might still breathe, but you didn't really live. So no, you wouldn't last a day. Not if your mistake became your identity. Not if your skin betrayed you in every conversation. In the medieval world, your face was your file, your name was your sentence, and forgiveness was a luxury rarely offered. Today, shaving your head is a personal choice. Maybe it's a fashion statement. Maybe you're going bald. Maybe it's a summer thing. But in the medieval world, having your head shaved wasn't a style. It was a sentence. Back then, hair was more than just hair. It was identity. It was pride. It was dignity. Especially for women. Long, well-kept hair symbolized beauty, honor, and femininity. For men, it could show rank, wisdom, religious devotion, or freedom. So when authorities shaved someone's head as punishment, it wasn't hygiene, it was humiliation. Imagine standing in a crowded marketplace. Your neighbors, your family, even children gather around. A guard steps forward, and without ceremony, your hair is cut away in chunks. No scissors, no care, just blades and fists. With every strand that falls, so does your reputation. You are no longer someone to be respected, you are someone to be stared at. For many medieval societies, this was the point. The punishment had to be visible. You couldn't sneak back into society and pretend nothing happened. A shaved head marked you as different, as guilty, as someone who had violated the code. You didn't need a written sentence. Your head told the story for you. Women often bore the worst of it. Accused of adultery, promiscuity, or shaming the village, women were dragged into public squares, their hair chopped off as people jeered. In many cultures, this act wasn't just physical punishment, it was symbolic execution. Your social death began the moment your hair hit the ground, and it didn't grow back easily. In some cases, women were forced to wear special caps, veils, or even signs around their necks until their hair returned. But by then, the shame had already done its work. No one looked at you the same, and worst of all, everyone remembered. Shaving the head was also used on prisoners and slaves. In prisons, it made escape harder. Guards could recognize a shaved head from a distance. Among slaves, it removed traces of personal style, tribal identity, or rebellion. You were no longer an individual, you were property. There's also the chilling idea that this punishment wasn't meant to end when the blade left your scalp. It was designed to linger. As your hair slowly grew back, people watched, measured, whispered. It was a countdown clock of shame. Every awkward phase, every uneven patch was a reminder you did something wrong, and the world saw it. Even in war, shaving heads became a form of revenge. In occupied France during World War II, women accused of sleeping with German soldiers had their heads shaved in public. The crowds didn't care about justice. They wanted a spectacle, and that's exactly what medieval punishments understood best. Pain might fade, but shame, public shame, sticks. So, you think you'd last a day in medieval society? Imagine one mistake costing you your identity, your appearance, your dignity. Imagine carrying your punishment on your scalp for the world to see. Every reflection, every glance, a sentence that grew back slowly but never truly left. Sleep tight. In the medieval world, getting your head shaved was bad. But if you were a woman, it wasn't just a punishment. It was a public execution of identity. Hair for women wasn't just hair. It was beauty, status, dignity, and virtue, wrapped into one long, carefully kept symbol. A woman's hair was often considered her crowning glory, and in many societies, it was linked directly to her worth, her femininity, even her morality. So when a woman was dragged into the town square and had her hair forcibly removed, it wasn't just about shaming her, it was about erasing her. Accused of adultery, treason, sleeping with the enemy, betraying the community, a woman might not be hanged or burned, but she'd be punished in a way that lasted longer. Public head shaving. In front of neighbors, friends, family, the whole town. She didn't just lose her hair, she lost control of her image, her social value, her dignity. And the punishment didn't end there. Once the hair was gone, some were paraded through the streets, barefoot, sometimes in torn clothing, often with signs around their necks describing their crimes. People would spit, throw things, laugh. For some, it was worse than death, because the crowd wasn't there for justice, they were there for a show. This wasn't unique to one culture. In medieval Europe, in some parts of Asia, and much later during World War II in occupied France, women accused of sleeping with enemy soldiers were shaved bald in public. The logic? You shamed us, so now we'll shame you. But why was it worse for women? Because unlike men, women couldn't simply blend back in after. A shaved head on a man might signal monkhood or military service. On a woman, it screamed disgrace. It was unnatural. It was visible. It was unforgettable. And it cut deeper than just looks. In a time when a woman's marriageability, safety, and reputation depended almost entirely on public perception, head shaving destroyed her future. Who would marry her now? Who would protect her? Even if the accusation was false, the hair was gone and the damage was done. Some women were forced to wear specific clothing afterward, scarves, veils, or head coverings, not of their choice, but assigned as marks of punishment. In some towns, their heads were shaved repeatedly until their debt to society was considered paid. But it never really was. And even as the hair grew back, Everyone remembered. "That's the one," they'd whisper. The one who was shaved. In many cases, the punishment wasn't really for the woman, it was for everyone else. A lesson, a threat. Step out of line, and this will be you. So, would you last a day? You're living in a time where beauty equals power, where appearance can decide your fate. And one morning, for one mistake, or even a rumor, you're marched into the square, your head stripped bare, your name dragged through dirt. The hair will grow back, sure, but your old life? That doesn't return. And the mirror? It'll never look the same. Imagine walking through town with your crime carved into your skin, not metaphorically, literally. In the medieval world, justice wasn't hidden in files or whispered behind closed doors. It was written in flesh, sometimes with ink, sometimes with knives, often with hot iron. Branding the face was one of the most brutal and permanent forms of punishment. You didn't get a fine. You got a letter. On your forehead. On your cheek. On your neck. Wherever it would be most visible. Thief? You got a T. Runaway slave? Maybe an F for fugitive. Adulterer? Sometimes a symbol or even the full word. No second chances. No way to hide it. This wasn't decorative. This wasn't a tattoo you could explain away at a party. It was medieval labeling, a living billboard of shame. You became your crime, and it hurt. Branding wasn't just symbolic. It was painful, disfiguring, and done without anesthetic. A red-hot iron was pressed against the skin until it sizzled. The smell of burning flesh, the hiss of shame. People gathered to watch, not out of compassion, but entertainment. Some branding was done with knives, cutting deep into the skin to leave scarred letters. Others used ink and needles, tattooing the word into flesh that would never shed it. There was no modern laser to erase it. You wore that word until the day you died. But why the face? Because your face is you. It's the first thing people see. In medieval society, where memory and honor were everything, there was no more efficient way to destroy a person's future than to deface them, literally. You couldn't blend in. You couldn't run away. Wherever you went, your history followed you, on your skin. Branding wasn't just used for major crimes. In some places, people were marked for petty theft, for debt, for minor rebellion. Sometimes, even innocent people were branded because they couldn't afford a better defense. Justice wasn't always fair. But branding? Branding was forever. Slaves were also branded, sometimes with the mark of their owner, sometimes with the symbol of slavery itself. The message was clear. You are owned. You are property. And if you escape, this mark will find you again. The horror didn't end after the branding. Imagine trying to rebuild your life with thief burned into your forehead. No job, no shelter. Just stares, whispers, and fear. For many, branding wasn't just punishment, it was a social death sentence. And here's the twist. Sometimes, people volunteered to be branded because the alternative was worse. Death, for example. In some cases, a judge would offer branding instead of hanging. You'd live, but as a walking warning sign. Still think you'd last a day? You wake up in the Middle Ages. Maybe you're desperate. Maybe you steal something. Maybe someone accuses you falsely. Doesn't matter. The iron comes out. The crowd gathers. And by the end of the day, your face isn't yours anymore. It belongs to your past. It screams your crime. It whispers your fate. And there's no covering it. Sleep tight. You shuffle toward the table, or rather, the wooden plank that leans against two mismatched barrels. It wobbles when someone breathes too hard. You sit on a stool with 3 legs, which was once a stool with 4. There's no tablecloth, no plates, just a shared chunk of something that once resembled bread. It's hard, not day-old hard. Not week-old hard. We're talking could, bludgeon, a rat hard. And that's exactly what someone did last week. You chip off a piece with your teeth carefully. You've already lost 1 molar to this exact loaf. It tastes like hay and regret. You chew slowly, not out of pleasure, but because your jaw refuses to move faster. It's still waking up, like the rest of your body, except the lice. They never sleep. Next to the bread is a jug. It's filled with something murky, brown, and slightly bubbly. This is your drink. It's called small beer. Weak, flat, and barely alcoholic. Not because you're being health conscious, but because the water might kill you. And this hasn't yet. You drink. It's warm, slightly sour, but at least it's not wiggling. You consider that a win. Someone across the table sniffs the bread and shrugs. No butter, no jam. Those are stories people tell their children to give them hope. There might have been cheese once, a long time ago, during a holiday, when a distant cousin got married and slaughtered a goat. But not today. Today is just bread and beer and silence. The fire isn't lit, so the cold gnaws at your hands while you eat. You try holding the crust to warm your fingers. It doesn't help. It's colder than the floor. You look around. Your brother is gnawing on a corner like it owes him money. Your sister is dipping her piece in the beer to soften it. Smart, desperate, both. The only meat in the room is the memory of meat, and even that smells a bit off. You'd talk, maybe, if anyone had the energy. But morning isn't for conversation. It's for chewing. Slowly, carefully, while pretending this isn't your life. A breeze slips in through a crack in the wall. You huddle closer to your stool. Your elbow brushes the person next to you. You apologize with your eyes. Words feel too luxurious. You finish your chunk, still hungry, still tired, still you. No one announces the end of breakfast. It just fades. One by one, people drift from the table like smoke from a dying candle, back to chores, or cold corners, or rat-related business. You stand, wipe your hands on your tunic. The crumbs fall like tiny disappointments to the floor. Outside, the wind howls like it knows what's coming. Another long day, another cold belly, another round of trying not to die before supper. Welcome to breakfast. You survived it, for now. In the world you live in now, your face is yours. You shape it with makeup, razors, glasses, filters. You control how you present yourself, and if you don't like what people see, you can change it, cut your hair, grow a beard, delete a post. But centuries ago, your face wasn't just a part of you. It was you. Your reputation. Your social status. Your honor. It wasn't something you curated. It was something the world read, like a page. And once something was written on it, burned, tattooed, scarred, it couldn't be erased. Your face became a permanent criminal record, and worse, a public warning sign. In medieval societies, identity wasn't verified through IDs or fingerprint scans. There was no database. The community was the database, and so your appearance carried all the data they needed. A clean face meant respect. A calm gaze meant trust. And any mark, cut, or brand meant danger, not to you, but to everyone else. A single symbol on your cheek, a word across your brow, a missing ear or nose, these were not just scars. They were sentences. Long after the punishment was over, the branding remained. And that was exactly the point. Some marks were functional. A T for thief, an F for fugitive. Letters burned into the skin with red-hot iron. Others were more abstract. Lines, crosses, animal symbols, each associated with a crime, a class, or a curse. If you were marked, people didn't ask questions. They looked, judged, and turned away. Because in a society built on honor and memory, the worst punishment wasn't death. It was being remembered wrongly, permanently. What made this worse is that these punishments applied even to the smallest infractions. Petty theft, lying, dishonoring the church. You didn't need to be a murderer to get a mark. Sometimes, all it took was being poor or speaking out of turn. The brand wasn't scaled to your crime. It was scaled to your usefulness to society. And once you were marked, that usefulness was over. There was no real after. People didn't believe in fresh starts. Not for criminals. Not for people with the wrong face. And don't think you could just grow your hair over it or cover it with cloth. In many cases, the law forbade it. You had to show your shame. It was your role now. You were not just a man or woman anymore. You were a reminder, walking proof that the system worked and that mistakes had consequences. Imagine trying to buy food with the word thief burned into your forehead. Imagine meeting a stranger and seeing their eyes flick up to the scar before you've said a word. Imagine never being looked at the same way again. That's what your face became. Not a mirror of your soul, but a reflection of your sentence. And even if you were innocent, even if time passed, even if you tried to do better, no one cared. Because they didn't remember who you were. They remembered what was written on your skin. So, would you last a day? Could you carry your past like a billboard, where every glance from a stranger is a silent trial? Could you live in a world where the punishment outlived the crime and lived on your face? Probably not. Because some things were never meant to be forgiven. They were meant to be seen. Sleep well. In the modern world, if you steal a loaf of bread, you might get a warning, maybe a fine, maybe some community service. You'll probably still go home, eat dinner, scroll your phone, and sleep in your own bed. In the medieval world, you might lose a hand, or an ear, or your hair, or your freedom, or your face. Because in those days, crime wasn't measured by intention. It wasn't weighed by context. No one cared if you were starving, desperate, or just made a mistake. What mattered was that you broke the rules, and the rules came with sharp edges. Justice wasn't gentle, and it definitely wasn't proportional. You could be branded a thief for stealing a coin, publicly shamed for insulting a noble, beaten for disobedience, whipped for wandering without permission, caged for refusing to kneel. It didn't take much. Sometimes it didn't take anything at all. Imagine this. A hungry child pockets a crust of bread from a stall. The shopkeeper screams. The crowd gathers. A city guard drags the child forward. There's no long investigation. No court appearance. Just a hot iron pulled from a fire and a T pressed into the child's cheek for life. Not because the bread was valuable, not because the crime was horrific, but because order must be maintained and fear works better than fairness. You see, the system wasn't designed to understand people, it was designed to control them, especially the poor, especially the voiceless. Laws were made by those with power to protect that power, and often the ones punished hardest were the ones who had the least to begin with. Couldn't pay a tax? That's a crime. Argued with a landowner? Crime. Wore the wrong color, prayed the wrong way, walked where you shouldn't? Crime. And once you were labeled a criminal, everything else got easier to punish. Small crimes snowballed into bigger punishments. Someone who stole once might be beaten, steal again, and you lose a finger. A third time, you're branded. A fourth, dead. Not because the crime changed, but because your label did. People weren't seen as humans making choices. They were seen as types. Thief, liar, harlot, traitor. And once that label stuck, the system made sure it never came off. In some towns, petty offenders were locked in public cages, or made to wear iron collars attached to posts in the marketplace, or paraded around with signs describing their sins. They were laughed at, spit on, humiliated. It wasn't about the crime. It was about the message. Step out of line, even just a little, and this could be you. The punishment was the spectacle, and the spectacle was the deterrent. And if you were poor, you were already halfway to punishment. The law didn't lean in your favor. It leaned on you. The rich could negotiate, pay fines, offer favors. The poor were simply made examples of. Steal a chicken, and you might hang next to the man who murdered a priest. Same gallows, different crime, same lesson, obey or disappear. So, would you last a day? You, with your ideas about fairness and second chances. You, who thinks justice means logic and empathy. You'd last until your first mistake. Or maybe not even that. Because in the medieval world, you didn't have to do something awful to be treated awfully. Sometimes, all it took was being hungry, being unlucky, or just being seen. Sleep tight. In the ancient and medieval world, the concept of personal identity didn't belong to everyone. It was a privilege, not a right. And if you were a slave, you didn't own yourself. Not your name, not your future, not even your body. To the people who bought and sold human beings, a slave wasn't a person. A slave was property, an asset, and like all property, it had to be marked. So they branded them, sometimes with hot iron, sometimes with tattoos, sometimes with carved letters or burned-in symbols that made sure no one ever forgot. You belonged to someone else. Across the Roman Empire, slaves were marked with the letters fug, short for fugitivus, meaning runaway. If you tried to escape once and got caught, they didn't just punish you, they made your disobedience public, a literal warning sign written into your skin. In other places, the marks were the initials of the master or the name of the estate, a human barcode, a living inventory tag. In medieval Europe, branding was standard, especially for slaves who came from war, who were bought in markets, or who were caught after escape. A hot iron would be pressed to the cheek, the forehead, or the chest. There were no anesthetics, no kindness, just the sizzle of flesh and the stench of ownership. But the cruelty wasn't just in the pain, it was in the permanence, because a scar never forgets. Once you were branded, you couldn't run, not truly. Even if you crossed borders, even if you changed your name, even if someone wanted to help you, one glance at your face, your shoulder, your arm, and the truth would surface. Not who you were, but what you had been made to be. In the Islamic world, some slaves were tattooed rather than burned. In East Asia, facial tattooing and body marking were also used to separate slaves and criminals from normal people. The message was the same everywhere. You are not like the rest, you are owned. For women, the humiliation was doubled. Female slaves were branded not only to mark them, but to warn others. This body is not free. This body is under control. Touching it without permission could cost you, because it belongs to someone. And there was no negotiation, no legal defense, no appeals process. The moment the iron touched your skin, your body stopped being yours. It didn't matter how you became a slave, through birth, war, debt, or betrayal. The result was the same. Your freedom was gone, and your flesh now told the story. So, would you last a day? Imagine waking up in a world where you could be bought, where someone else decides what you wear, what you eat, what you're called, and then, to make sure no one ever forgets who you belong to, they burn it into your skin. You try not to scream. You try to survive. But even if you escape, the mark is still there. You're still seen, not as a person, but as a possession. A name can be changed. A lie can be denied. But a scar always speaks. Sleep well. There are many ways to mark a criminal. Burn them. Tattoo them. Cut them. Humiliate them in public. But sometimes, the most effective punishment doesn't require blood or fire. Sometimes, all it takes is a haircut. In certain prisons, especially in 18th and 19th century Europe, a prisoner's head became part of the sentence. But they weren't shaved clean for hygiene. They weren't groomed for uniformity. Their hair was cut in bizarre, deliberate patterns, not to punish the prisoner's scalp, but to punish their freedom. Because if they escaped, they'd be instantly recognized. By everyone. One half of the head shaved bald, the other left untouched. A stripe right down the middle. A bald ring circling the crown. Sometimes they looked ridiculous, but the intent was anything but funny. This was public tracking, medieval style. Before barcodes, GPS, or mugshots, the state used humiliation as surveillance. No need to send out wanted posters or organize search parties. If someone escaped and walked into town with a head that looked like a poorly planned garden path, people would notice. They always noticed. These weren't just bad haircuts. They were calculated, sharp lines, asymmetry, ugly by design. You could spot a fugitive from across a crowded street, across a field. The hair did the policing, long before uniforms and badges ever arrived. Even inside prison walls, the haircut was a message. You don't belong to yourself anymore. You are marked, mocked, known. And it didn't stop with men. Female prisoners were also subjected to these cuts, or had their heads completely shaved. Some were forced to wear caps or bonnets to signal disgrace. Others weren't allowed to cover up at all. The shame had to show. Because the haircut was more than identification. It was social exile. Once released, many former prisoners found that the haircut followed them. Literally. Hair takes time to grow back, and in that time, you didn't just look like an inmate. You looked like someone who didn't deserve trust. People crossed the street. Employers said no. Friends disappeared. And if you were caught trying to hide it by covering it with a hat or wrapping it in cloth, you could be punished all over again. Because the system wasn't just about serving time, it was about making sure the time stayed with you. Hair, after all, is a strange thing. It grows. It returns. It forgives. But in these punishments, it was weaponized. Not to injure, but to identify. Not to wound, but to warn. A bad haircut became a loud announcement. This person is dangerous. This person is guilty. This person must be watched. And just like that, the haircut became a kind of scar, less painful, maybe, but just as visible. Just as permanent. In all the ways that mattered. So, would you last a day? Not behind bars, not under guard, but afterward, in the marketplace, in the street, in the silence of people staring and not saying anything. Because in the world you just stepped into, freedom wasn't given all at once. It grew back slowly, like hair, and not everyone had the time or the patience to wait. Sleep well, there are crimes, and then there is treason. In the medieval and early modern world, nothing struck more fear into rulers and more fury into mobs than betrayal. To betray your king, your city, your people. It wasn't just illegal, it was unforgivable, and it had to be remembered. So how do you make sure a traitor is never forgotten? Simple. You burn it into their face. A single letter, V. V for Verräter in German. Traitor. Etched into the forehead with red-hot iron, seared between the eyes for all to see. There were no second chances. No exile. No hiding. Because once you wore the V, you were no longer one of them. You were the warning, the symbol, the story they'd tell their children. Branded traitors were often left alive on purpose, not out of mercy, but out of utility. Executing a traitor made them a martyr. Letting them live made them a lesson. A breathing reminder of what loyalty meant, and what happened when it broke. And the V wasn't subtle. It was huge. Letters weren't burned in tiny fonts. They were bold, deep, raised scars of judgment. The iron used for branding was specially made for visibility. The pain wasn't the point. The mark was. This practice reached its peak in moments of chaos, revolutions, coups, civil wars. During the French Revolution, people were branded as counter-revolutionaries. In 20th century Europe, suspected Nazi collaborators were sometimes branded or humiliated with letters and shaved heads. The logic was consistent. You broke the bond, now your face wears the punishment. And make no mistake, this wasn't a private matter. Branding was public theatre. Crowds gathered. Children were told to watch. The sizzle of flesh was part of the ceremony. There's something primal about the forehead. It's the center of the face, the place where people look when they speak to you. Branding it wasn't just about visibility. It was about erasing personhood. Once you had a V on your forehead, you were no longer part of society. You weren't punished for being dangerous. You were punished so that everyone else would stay obedient. Even the aftermath was calculated. These people weren't allowed to cover the mark. Hats were forbidden. Scarves were torn off. If someone tried to hide their V, the punishment often started over. Some were paraded through the streets, others forced to clean public squares, kneel in front of government buildings, or shout confessions from balconies, all with the V staring back at the crowd. And here's the truly medieval part. Sometimes, no trial was needed. A neighbor's rumor, a whispered lie, a political shift. One day, you're loyal. The next, you're the enemy. And the V finds your forehead just the same. Because treason wasn't just about your actions. It was about your usefulness. And when you stopped being useful, the iron came out. So, would you last a day? Imagine waking up in a city on the edge. The air smells like fear. The laws change by the hour. You say the wrong thing. Speak to the wrong person. Trust the wrong friend. And suddenly, you're dragged into the square. Tied down. Marked. Not killed. Not exiled. Branded. Alive. And alone. Now, every face that looks at you reads one word. Traitor. Not because they know your story, but because the V told them what to think. And from now on, The only thing that speaks louder than your voice is your skin. Sleep well. If you think branding and facial mutilation were just a Western obsession, think again. Asia had its own methods, and some of them were just as permanent, if not more poetic in their cruelty. In Imperial China, there was a punishment called mo mian, literally, ink the face. Also known as tattooing the face, it was one of the 5 punishments used for centuries. And it wasn't done for art. It was done for shame. Instead of branding with iron, Chinese officials used ink and knives. Criminals had their crimes carved or written onto their foreheads, cheeks, or jaws, usually with a brush and black ink, then cut into the skin to scar permanently. The words didn't fade. They healed into warnings. Sometimes the characters meant thief, traitor, or exile. Sometimes the punishment was symbolic, just a single, bold mark that meant, this one has broken the law. And like their Western counterparts, these marks weren't meant to be hidden. They were placed where no hat or hairstyle could cover them, because the goal wasn't justice, it was memory. The tattoo was your sentence, your curse, your social death certificate. This wasn't only for the worst crimes either. You didn't need to murder someone to get your face carved. Petty theft, desertion, dishonoring your family. In some dynasties, simply speaking against the emperor could earn you a mark across the brow. And once it was there, you never belonged again. In some cases, criminals were banished to frontier lands, tattooed first, so even if they ran, their faces would betray them. There were no papers to check. Just a glance. Just a face. Japan had similar practices. During the Edo period, certain regions used facial tattoos to mark criminals. Different designs meant different crimes. Lines across the forehead for a first offense. Circles on the arms or cheeks for the second. By the third, a full black ring around the face. Not a death sentence. Something worse. A life sentence. In skin. In Korea, there are records of tattooing as punishment, too, often reserved for slaves or rebels. Even the Mongols, known for their nomadic power, sometimes used body markings to control identity and warn others. These weren't just punishments, they were a system of visible control. And like everywhere else, the marks didn't stop at the body. They reached the soul, because in Confucian-influenced cultures, the body was sacred, an inheritance from your ancestors. To cut it, deface it, or mark, it was a deep spiritual violation. To be tattooed wasn't just social exile. It was filial shame, a wound that echoed through generations. So no, Asia wasn't kinder. Just quieter, more poetic in its permanence. Less screaming, more silence. But the pain? Still there. Still inked. Still living on the face. So, would you last a day? You commit a petty crime. A guard approaches. You don't see a sword. Just a brush. And a knife. And later, you catch your reflection in the river. The mark is still fresh. The wound still stings. And the world will never forget what it says. Even if you do. Sleep well. There are crimes. And then there is treason. In the medieval and early modern world, nothing struck more fear into rulers and more fury into mobs than betrayal. To betray your king, your city, your people. It wasn't just illegal, it was unforgivable, and it had to be remembered. So how do you make sure a traitor is never forgotten? Simple. You burn it into their face. A single letter, V. V for Verräter in German. Traitor. Etched into the forehead with red-hot iron, seared between the eyes for all to see. There were no second chances. No exile. No hiding. Because once you wore the V, you were no longer one of them. You were the warning, the symbol, the story they'd tell their children. Branded traitors were often left alive on purpose, not out of mercy, but out of utility. Executing a traitor made them a martyr. Letting them live made them a lesson. A breathing reminder of what loyalty meant, and what happened when it broke. And the V wasn't subtle. It was huge. Letters weren't burned in tiny fonts. They were bold, deep, raised scars of judgment. The iron used for branding was specially made for visibility. The pain wasn't the point. The mark was. This practice reached its peak in moments of chaos, revolutions, coups, civil wars. During the French Revolution, people were branded as counter-revolutionaries. In 20th century Europe, suspected Nazi collaborators were sometimes branded or humiliated with letters and shaved heads. The logic was consistent. You broke the bond, now your face wears the punishment. And make no mistake, this wasn't a private matter. Branding was public theatre. Crowds gathered. Children were told to watch. The sizzle of flesh was part of the ceremony. There's something primal about the forehead. It's the center of the face, the place where people look when they speak to you. Branding it wasn't just about visibility. It was about erasing personhood. Once you had a V on your forehead, you were no longer part of society. You weren't punished for being dangerous. You were punished so that everyone else would stay obedient. Even the aftermath was calculated. These people weren't allowed to cover the mark. Hats were forbidden. Scarves were torn off. If someone tried to hide their V, the punishment often started over. Some were paraded through the streets, others forced to clean public squares, kneel in front of government buildings, or shout confessions from balconies, all with the V staring back at the crowd. And here's the truly medieval part. Sometimes, no trial was needed. A neighbor's rumor, a whispered lie, a political shift. One day, you're loyal. The next, you're the enemy. And the V finds your forehead just the same. Because treason wasn't just about your actions. It was about your usefulness. And when you stopped being useful, the iron came out. So, would you last a day? Imagine waking up in a city on the edge. The air smells like fear. The laws change by the hour. You say the wrong thing. Speak to the wrong person. Trust the wrong friend. And suddenly, you're dragged into the square. Tied down. Marked. Not killed. Not exiled. Branded. Alive. And alone. Now, every face that looks at you reads one word: traitor. Not because they know your story, but because the V told them what to think. And from now on, the only thing that speaks louder than your voice is your skin. Sleep well, so now you know. You wouldn't have lasted a day, not because you're weak, but because the world back then was built differently. Pain was public, shame was strategy, justice was permanent. In medieval times, punishment wasn't just about making you suffer, it was about making you visible. Not just for a moment, but forever. A shaved head, a branded face, a tattooed name. You didn't leave your crime behind, you wore it. And society made sure you didn't forget it either. In a world without digital records, the body became the file. Your skin was the sentence, your face was the message. The goal wasn't rehabilitation, it was fear. Fear that someone else would see you and never dare to follow in your footsteps. We like to imagine that history is a list of events. Wars. Kings. Inventions. But really, it's a catalogue of control and what it took to maintain it. You didn't need mass surveillance. You just needed one branded man walking through the marketplace. Justice didn't have to chase you. It just had to leave a mark. And so it did, over and over, on the poor, the accused, the unlucky, people who made small mistakes, people who spoke too soon, people who trusted the wrong person. All of them carried punishment like a shadow, long after the sun had set. Today, we call this history. Back then, it was just life. So no, you wouldn't have lasted a day. Not in a world where a haircut could be a sentence, where your face could become a warning, where forgiveness wasn't part of the system and forgetting was never allowed. But that's okay, because this isn't your world anymore. You get to sleep in safety, with your face unmarked and your name your own. You get to make mistakes, and maybe even be forgiven. They didn't. So rest easy, close your eyes, and be glad you were born now, not then. History may be boring, but for some people, it was terrifying. Sleep well.